Okay, hello everyone and welcome to our virtual UN Day celebration. We are so excited to have all of you with us on this really special occasion. My name is Darby and I support our educational partnerships around the country. I am joined today by one of our incredible group leaders, Kelsey, two former EF travelers, Elio and Kara, and our featured guest from UNA USA, which is a program of the United Nations Foundation, Troy Wolf, who serves as Senior Director of Partnerships and Special Initiatives. Welcome all of you. Our time together will be mainly devoted to hearing from Troy on this year's theme of UN Day, which I will let him share with you. But then we have a very special treat at the end with Elio and Kara facilitating a Q&A to dig into what all of us can do to support the vital work of the United Nations and the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. And lastly, I have a really awesome announcement for the teachers on the call as well, so stay tuned for that. With that said, Troy, so happy to have you with us, and I will turn this over to you.
Thank you, Darby, and greetings to everyone on the call. I am very honored to take part today in this UN Day program, and I thank our partners over at Education First for bringing us all together for this virtual convening. While I wish I could have been with you in person, we must acknowledge that we're still facing the effects of a global pandemic. So I'm very happy to make do and connect with you virtually, and to take this moment to really celebrate the United Nations 76th anniversary. This is an opportune time for us to recognize just how essential the United Nations remains today, and how we each play a part in creating a blueprint for a better future. In September, the 76th session of the United Nations General Assembly took place, bringing together world leaders, entrepreneurs, activists, and other change makers to make commitments to pressing global challenges. This convening sounded the alarm for urgent action on a variety of issues, from tackling the COVID-19 pandemic and climate emergency to responding to worsening humanitarian crises and severe food shortages. And we all know one absolute truth, that no one country can tackle these challenges alone. It's going to require a coordinated effort from all of us if we're to address these global challenges. Earlier this year, the Biden-Harris administration took office with the promise to renew American leadership at the United Nations and to once again assume our role on the global stage. Just as the UN's founding signaled the dawn of a new era, this moment in time also symbolized a new beginning for America and our engagement at the United Nations. US Ambassador to the United Nations, Linda Thomas Greenfield, said it best when she said, "America is back, multilateralism is back, diplomacy is back." The United Nations Association of the United States of America takes action very seriously in order to ensure that our priorities of Americans are shared and amplified to our lawmakers who make decisions about America's role on the global stage. That's why UNA USA's core ask of our elected officials is always to ensure strong US leadership and full funding for the United Nations so that the United Nations can do what it does best. On this special occasion, we recognize you too, you who have played a part in restoring and rebuilding better partnerships between the United States and the United Nations. Because of you, the United Nations Population Fund, UNFPA, once again has financial support from the United States, making it possible for girls and women to access essential aid and services. Because of you, the United States announced the restoration of $150 million to the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, a UN agency dedicated to supporting Palestinian refugees. Because of you, Secretary of State Anthony Blinken announced that the United States would seek election to the UN Human Rights Council for 2022-2024, citing our country's commitment to uphold and protect human rights. Because of you, the World Health Organization could count on America's leadership in the fight against COVID-19 after President Biden halted plans for America's withdrawal. Because of you, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres and US Special Envoy, Presidential Envoy for Climate Change, John Kerry, announced and joined us live at UNA USA's Global Engagement Summit and announced that we would be rejoining the Paris Agreement, reaffirming our country's pledge to respond to the climate crisis. These are just a few of the many accomplishments that you helped make possible this year. And these actions could not have come at a more critical time in our history. The United Nations is leading the international response on numerous challenges, many of which carry a severity that the United Nations has not encountered since its founding. In fact, Secretary General Guterres has said that the pandemic is the greatest test since World War II. The pandemic has tilted our world on its axis and has threatened our blueprint for progress. It's reversed hard-won wins on all the Sustainable Development Goals, exacerbating existing inequalities and serving as a catalyst for economic collapse and social disruption. We've lost decades of gains, and with only 8 years left until the deadline to meet the Sustainable Development Goals, it's a very hard truth to acknowledge. This has proved to be a pivotal year for the world indeed, one that is challenging us to find quick solutions to large, complex problems. So while it's true that we've re-engaged the United Nations this year, we cannot afford to become complacent. 19 months following the World Health Organization classification of COVID-19 as a pandemic, the world is still reeling from its impact. Since March 2020, almost 5 million people around the world have died. And while the vaccine rollout here in the United States and in other parts of the world has been largely successful, inequitable distribution of vaccines threatens our ability to defeat this virus. As of last month, 80% of vaccines had gone to high-income nations, but only 2% of people in low-income countries have received their very first dose. COVID-19 has also spurred another looming pandemic, a global hunger crisis. According to the 2021 Global Report on Food Crisis, conflict, climate change, and COVID-19 are pushing millions into food insecurity. In fact, the number of people facing food insecurity and those in need of urgent humanitarian assistance reached a 5-year high in 2020, bringing attention to a very disturbing trend. In August, the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released its latest report on the climate crisis. The key takeaway: things are getting worse, a lot worse. In fact, the Secretary General Guterres has called the report a code red for humanity. Just recently, we saw the devastating impact of Hurricane Ida from New Orleans to New York. The impacts of climate change are rapidly intensifying and are felt in every region of the world, and we're running out of time to take meaningful action before some impacts become irreversible. And perhaps most recently, we've seen the alarming deterioration of humanitarian crises in Haiti and Afghanistan. A powerful earthquake in Haiti left millions in urgent need of essential aid and services. And in Afghanistan, the Taliban's rapid takeover has left the world gravely concerned about the welfare of Afghans, especially girls and women. Crises like these have sent shockwaves all around the world, bringing to light just how necessary the United Nations work is in mobilizing a coordinated response. I know what you're thinking. The weight of the world is heavy. It's easy to feel overwhelmed by the current challenges we're facing. You may be asking yourself, how in the world are we going to overcome this? But in the 76 years since its existence, the United Nations has never once, not once, backed down from its promise to deliver a better world, and it never will. No matter the challenge, the United Nations is prepared to meet it. And yes, these are all complex and interconnected challenges, but I don't mention them to instill in you a sense of helplessness or to dissuade you from taking action. Quite the contrary. I highlight them to encourage you to take action because your action matters and the impact of your actions make a difference. And you all know and understand this action. UNA USA members have been advocating for the United Nations' fundamental purpose before it even existed. President Truman referred to the signatories of the United Nations Charter in 1945 as the architects of a better world. But the truth is, we're all architects of a better world. And while we're all architects working together to create a blueprint for a better future, let's also be clear. A strong house can only stand with a solid foundation. As the largest network of United Nations advocates in the world, you play a vital role in keeping that foundation strong. Against the backdrop of COVID-19 restrictions, you've prioritized programs, partnerships, and initiatives to protect and promote the life-saving work of the United Nations. From implementing community projects to driving progress on the Sustainable Development Goals, to meeting with your local officials and members of Congress, and everything in between. All of you are showing up and speaking up for the United Nations while supporting your community. For example, the UNA Minnesota chapter partnered with the City of St. Paul, the Mississippi River Plastic Pollution Initiative, and the UN Environment Program, not only to help clean up plastic litter and other debris from the banks of the Mississippi River, but also to collect data to generate a plastic pollution map to help policymakers and citizens make smarter, more sustainable decisions. The UNA Arizona State University, Howard University, and Los Angeles chapters came together to host a global advocate forum focused on equality, education, peace, and justice. The UNA Miami chapter collaborated with and contributed to a local project and unveiled a one-of-a-kind mural in the Miami area that highlights SDG 14, Life Below Water. And these are just a handful of examples out of many that represent how you strengthen the foundation of the United Nations. And even beyond programs and partnerships, you understand the power of your voice, your ideas, your solutions. Earlier this summer, UNA USA Youth Observer hosted a virtual listening tour to hear directly from young members about their hopes, concerns, and priorities for the future. The key takeaways: young people are concerned about inequality, about a lack of diverse voices in critical discussions, and inaction among global leaders. But one thing is clear: young people are taking it upon themselves to contribute to the world that they want to see. In fact, a recent poll conducted by our sister organization, the Better World Campaign, found that the top two issues most important to young people are promoting human rights for all and slowing the impacts of climate change. They want global leaders to know that they are hardworking and want to make a difference in the world. Young people are the greatest stakeholders in what happens today, and the United Nations is dedicated to delivering on its promise to build a better world for future generations. That means not only listening to them and amplifying their voices, but also providing young people with a seat at the decision-making table. Recently, Secretary General Guterres shared his vision for the future, calling on more inclusive and effective multilateralism in a landmark report, Our Common Agenda, The Only Way Forward is Together. Members like you, whether you knew it or not, contributed significantly to this report. Last year, in recognition of the UN 75th anniversary, many of you shared your thoughts during the UN 75 consultations. Your feedback was sent to the UN officials and greatly inspired the development of the report, Our Common Agenda. So let me be clear, your voice matters. Your input is helping the United Nations to outline priorities in an ever-changing world. Your voice is setting a clear path forward for the United Nations to deliver on its promise for a better future for everyone, everywhere. Over the last 7 decades, the United Nations has resolved many complex and delicate issues, but the reality is new challenges will always be around the corner. But what gives us hope is the fact that the UN is prepared to meet those challenges when they do arise. And that's precisely what makes the United Nations so unique and essential. It is the only forum that brings together world leaders from 193 countries to maintain international peace and security, to develop friendly relations among nations, and to achieve international cooperation in solving international problems. There is no doubt about it. 76 years later, the United Nations remains as relevant and as essential as it was at the time of its founding. It's clear that your advocacy does have an impact, and so it's only right that I invite you to take part in an urgent advocacy action right now. Please take out your phones. As you likely know, the United States has imposed an arbitrary cap on our payments to UN peacekeeping for more than 20 years. As a result, the United States is currently $1 billion in arrears to UN peacekeeping. Representative Sarah Jacobs, along with Representatives Castro and Bass, introduced a bill earlier this summer to lift this cap so that the United States can pay its treaty-obligated dues in full, a crucial step in restoring our credibility at the United Nations. It's just time that we pay what we promised. To engage you in an advocacy ask right now, again, please take out your phone and text the word PEACE, P-E-A-C-E, to 30644. I'll repeat that, That's the word PEACE, P-E-A-C-E, to 30644 to urge your members of Congress to support the United States Committee on Peacekeeping Act of 2021 to ensure that the United States can fulfill its financial obligations to the United Nations in the future. In conclusion, we cannot afford to rely only on grandiose ideas to meet present challenges. Our words must be followed by our actions. Now is the time to make plans, to map out our path forward, because creating a blueprint for a better future requires all of us to work together to stay true to and to build upon the vision that formed the United Nations 76 years ago. The world needs the United Nations, and the United Nations certainly needs you. With your leadership, action, and advocacy, the United States can better help the United Nations so that the United Nations can continue to help the world. Thank you very much.
Troy, wow. Thank you so much for the inspiration and all of the fantastic information. This gives me a lot to think about, and I know the teachers and students in schools and in homes across the country all feel the same. At this time, I want to turn this over to Elio and Kara. So glad that you are with us today to ask some questions of Troy as well. Before you dig in, if you can introduce yourselves, that would be great. Where you're from, where you go to school, when you traveled with EF, and what was your favorite part of your trip to New York City? Would be great. And Elio, I think we'll start with you.
Yeah, my name is Elio Martinez. I'm from Irving, Texas. I'm a senior in Uplift Infinity. And I went to New York with EF last month in September, the beginnings of September. And it was an incredible experience because I saw New York in numerous TV shows and numerous pictures. And it's in history and it's engraved as like the heart of immigration and, what started the melting pot of America, basically. And as soon as I stepped into the blinding lights of Times Square, I knew this. I'm in a great place. I was overwhelmed with emotions and it's hard to describe them.
Awesome. That is terrific. And Kara?
Hi, I'm Kara. I am originally from Irving, Texas as well, but I am currently in Portland, Oregon. I'm a freshman at Clackamas Community College, and I went on the same trip as Eliel, which I can confirm he was very overwhelmed with emotions. But my personal favorite part was probably going to see the 9/11 memorial, because I had been to New York before and it was just something that I hadn't seen before, and it was very impactful. And I don't know if it's just because I've dealt with loss before, but it spoke very heavily to me. And so it was something that I very much appreciated to be able to see.
That's amazing. Thank you both so much for sharing and the introductions. And then I think we can jump into your first question. And Elio, we'll start with you.
First of all, I'd like to thank you, Troy, for the inspiring words you gave us. And I myself am an advocate of change, and I always seek to better the lives of those around me. And so I have a question to you. How do young people support the UN goals and incite change? How can we be change makers as students? And what are some tangible steps that we can take to ensure that the change that we want to see can happen?
Thank you for that question, Elio. I might come back to you. You gave me 3 questions in one, so I wrote down 2 of them, but I might come back to you for the 3rd. But to your question about change makers, I'm very excited about the current moment that we're in with youth and youth voice, and how youth are kind of stepping up and challenging the old guard. I'm inspired by that. That is certainly a marquee of your generation. I would first say encouraged to do that. We're all familiar with the climate rights activist Greta Thunberg, some years back when she was at the United Nations and presented, but also she addressed adults peer-to-peer on some things that she wasn't happy with. And so I encourage all young folks to continue to cultivate your voice, continue to speak about things that you're passionate about. Where solutions come, I think we live in a time, where solutions come from, it matters less as long as you have a great idea. To be change makers, I think it's important to bring 100% of yourself to whatever it is that you're doing. We all have a unique lens from which we see the world, from which we interpret our experiences. We live in a world of storytelling, and so I think the ability where you can take some of your experiences from traveling, being a global citizen of the world, you see things, it changes your thinking. I think that can lend itself to being a role model for folks who may not have seen as much as you have. I remember my first time when I left the country and I came back, and I was a very different person. The first time I left the country, I went to Paris and Spain in high school. And it just really changed my perspective as an American when I came back. And it opened up a hole for international travel. To your question, regarding next steps, I think continue to throw yourself into conversations that address local issues. Continue to familiarize yourself with the Sustainable Development Goals and the work of the United Nations from an international perspective, so that perhaps some of that thinking and some of those ideas can be distilled to address issues in your community. I think an intergenerational approach, working with people who look different from you, cultures who work different from you. We are a very inclusive organization, and we just want to make sure that we have cross-representation, at all the conversations that we're having. I think, again, being someone who has traveled, such as yourself and Kara, I think that puts you ahead of the game with being able to work with people from different environments. And so just step up and just continue to be a role model. One person can make a difference. Thanks for that question.
Appreciate you. Thank you.
Awesome. Kara, over to you.
So my question is, what inspires people like you to work at the United Nations Foundation? Sorry, that's a mouthful. And do you get to travel to other places within the US and out of the country to form global relationships?
Perfect. So I'm going to go first with the thing that inspires me. So, the UN has been around since 1945, way before I was born. But I'm a former Peace Corps volunteer. Many of you are familiar with Peace Corps. It's a travel abroad. You have an opportunity to spend a maximum of 27 months abroad, and you work with host country nationals in a foreign country. It was in Peace Corps where I really learned about the work of the UN. At the time, the United Nations had a framework that countries had signed on board to achieve called the Millennium Development Goals. It wasn't the 17 goals, but it was 8 goals that member states had signed on board to achieve by the year 2015. And I stumbled upon that when I was in Peace Corps, and I incorporated that work into my project. And as a result of that, just learned a lot more about the United Nations, its work, its principles, its mission, its core values. And I kind of fell in love with that. And so what inspires me is the hope that through dialogue and conversation that we can solve some of these global problems. There's an expression over at the UN that says, as long as member states and nations are speaking to each other, they're not fighting each other. And if you think about the reason that the United Nations was created back in 1945, the very first reason it was created was to avoid World War III. And so on that measure alone, at least we have not entered into World War III. Member states and nations are continuing to have an open dialogue. And again, so as long as we're talking with each other, even though we might not agree, we're not fighting with each other. The work of the United Nations and being a humanitarian and being a former Peace Corps volunteer, I think is part of it's in my core, it's part of my DNA. I do believe in the best in humanity. And what keeps me motivated is just the framework and the belief and the observation that I'm not alone in this endeavor, that there are many people who are not looking for a fight, we're just looking for some global solutions. And so that's really what puts me together. To your question about traveling, I think again, I've been with the foundation for more than a decade. And I think when I joined, you hear United Nations in the title, and you give me my plane ticket, I'm ready to go, right? And, very excited to join the United Nations Foundation. But then I realized shortly thereafter that I was working with an entity within the foundation that was focused on building strong US-UN relations. And while we were still operating programs and running programs in the Model UN space, which is a fantastic educational activity, and it brings in all the perspectives of member states, it doesn't necessarily mean that, because you're participating in a Model UN simulation that you're going to travel abroad. That said, I have had the opportunity to go to China, went to China for a Model UN activity, did some work with Peking University in their Model UN program, and got a wonderful opportunity to see Beijing. I've been to Lebanon twice. and have been to Turkey twice with helping them launch model and programming there. So I have had the good, and I've traveled a great deal across the United States, particularly around this time of the year every year. During non-COVID times, we celebrate UN Day, just like this convening is celebrating UN Day. And as I said earlier in my opening remarks, usually we do these in person. So I get a lot of travel in the United States, not as much travel internationally, but I look for those opportunities, and when I can fit them in, when they align with my work, I make it happen. Thanks for the question.
Elio, back to you.
Yeah, so one thing that I like to do is network, and I would obviously like to have more communications with not only yourself but with the UN. So with that being said, how can we get connected with the Secretary General and have our voices heard? And are there any internships or something that I could do to make some changes within UN and make my voice heard as well?
Yes.
And how can we apply?
Yes, thank you for that question. And I'm going to go with your word network. So UNA USA, we are a membership organization, but the good news, membership is free for anyone under the age of 26. So anybody on this call who's under 26, please go to unausa.org. Sorry, Darby, this is the plug. Please go to unausa.org and activate your complimentary membership in UNA USA. Why? So Elio just mentioned networks. We live in a time where people are looking for jobs, and it doesn't matter if you're in middle school, high school, college, or you're transitioning out. I believe in this day and time, you get your next opportunity based on the networks that you're part of. So what better way than to join a network? You're already part of the Education First Network. You can join many networks. You got the Education First Network, you got the UNA USA Network, and through these networks, you will learn about future opportunities. You will have an opportunity to demonstrate your excellence, be a leader, bring youth voice to conversations, and network yourself into your next opportunity, I think is what I'm trying to get at. To the commitment of the Secretary General, there have been many Secretary Generals who commit to youth, but this one, our current Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, has created, this is the second envoy on youth, Jayatma with Rana Mayaki. You may follow her. You may also be interested in following our current youth observer to the United Nations, Cynthia Yu. You can look for her. To your questions about internships, the UN itself does have internships. The United Nations Foundation, UNA USA, we also have internships, and many of our UNA USA chapters have internships. And so if you're in a community, I would also Google and encourage you to see if you are in close proximity to a chapter of UNA USA. And if so, affiliate with them. You can network, you can join, you can have your agenda executed through that as well. So yes, so please pursue all of those avenues.
Thank you.
That's great. Kara, back to you.
Do you have any last bits of advice for any of the students or even the teachers that are on the call?
I do. I'm going to speak to the teachers now. I think when you think about bringing the United Nations to your students, be it middle school, high school, college, after school, during school, what have you, the beauty of this moment is that we can customize, we can co-create together things that will be relevant for your stakeholders based on your investment of time, based on your learning objectives. I would say too that many of our resources, and this perhaps was stemming first from our touch points with Model United Nations, many of our resources and opportunities for young people do develop in them global competencies that are life-lasting and life-changing. And some of those you might say, well, what are you talking about, Troy? So we have these chapters where we want young people to speak up. And so public speaking, cross-cultural understanding, critical thinking, we are engaging our members. We're an intergenerational organization, and we are engaging our members, someone from middle school to someone who's 94. We are engaging them in conversations about real world activities, issues, and interests for the express purpose of coming up with solutions. And if that's not something that's going to make college and career ready kids be ready to change the world, then nothing really exists.
Wow, this is awesome. A big thank you to everyone for being with us on the call today, and happy UN Day. We do have a last very special announcement for the teachers that are with us that we are so excited to share, and you'll see an email follow-up from me over the next couple days. We have been working with many EF teachers to develop an online virtual course called the UN Sustainable Development Goals from Global to Local that will launch this Wednesday, so day after tomorrow. Registration will be open for 2 weeks, and the first session, of which there are 3 like distinct webinars, will begin in mid-November. So don't miss this opportunity to dig deeper into the vital work of the UN, connect with teachers from different parts of the US. You'll get free recertification credit hours and then be able to use the Sustainable Development Agenda in your classroom, regardless of what you teach and your discipline. I also want to mention the first session will feature the spokesperson to the UN Secretary General, Step Dujarric. So, wow, what an amazing opportunity. I will include my contact information in the note you will receive. So check it out, register quickly because it will fill up. Ask me any questions you might have, and I'd be happy to answer them as well. So once again, happy UN Day to everyone. Thank you to Troy, Kelsey, Elio, and Kara for being with us, and everyone have a wonderful day. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Darby. Thanks, Kara. Thanks, Elio. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.